All right, so we start with the first topic, first unit, first block of cognitive psychology, right? So here we are going to be talking about why we are even studying cognitive psychology, Why is it so important? What is cognitive psychology, first of all? Cognitive means the mental processes. Now, what are these mental processes? What's happening inside our head, inside our brain? That is what we need to study. So what happens is there is perception, you're perceiving something, you're remembering something, you're reasoning something, there is creativity, there is problem solving, there is decision making. All this is part of cognition. So when we say that this person has a cognitive ability, it means all of this. Now, why is it so important to study this? Why is there so much curiosity to study this? What is the advantage of that, right? So the idea is that how we know that thoughts lead to our, it leads to action, it leads to a behavior. What we are thinking cognitively, what we are, processing in our mind, how we are perceiving and storing information, that results in the way we behave. So it's very important, and behaving in society with each other, communicating with each other, it's so important how that cognition is taking place, right? Although we may end up looking at the same thing, smelling the same thing, but why is it that everybody has a different reaction? Why is it that everybody's behavior is different? So that is something that is very interesting, which cognitive psychologists are trying to find out. There have been n number of research, and it's still going on, right? So that is the reason why we are studying what we are studying. So there are, basically it is because the behavior is a result of what is stored or what is there in our cognitive mind. What is being stored, what is being retrieved. That is why it is so important to study it, right? Now some very interesting facts here. Why does the brain, why do things happen in a certain way? What is so weird about certain things which the cognitive psychologists want to study? So some of the examples given in our textbooks, right? So first of all, just to tell you, cognitive psychologists, what do they study? They study perception, they study how we learn things, how we remember things, how we think, right? Now, for example, the first one is that when you're proofreading something, when you are seeing something, you've typed a letter and you're reading it, you must have read it a lot of times, but you don't, sometimes you're not able to, see the mistakes that are there. For example, end of the sentence, there's a the, and beginning of the next sentence, there is a the, but you just read it as a single the and move on. Why does that happen? Right? That is something that, the psychologists want to know. Why does it happen? It happens because in our cognition, we have patterns. It's called pattern recognition. So that is something that is worth studying. How do we form those patterns, and why is it that there is some mistake that we are completely ignoring? Because our mind is reading a pattern. It's not just reading word to word or, one idea to one idea. It's just the whole thing together. So pattern recognition. Okay. So the second thing is that sometimes when you are listening to a lecture and you are taking down notes, right? Why is it that you can't do these two processes, mental processes, simultaneously? Here it involves you to hear using your, sensory senses, at the same time understanding and writing it or scribbling something. So sometimes you find it very difficult. Why does that happen? So these are all the questions which, psychologists are constantly thinking about and researching, about. Now, the next thing is about, the next example given is the phone. Somebody tells you a phone number. So you don't find a scribbling pad. So what do? You keep repeating it. 995848866799. So you keep doing it till you write it or you remember it. Why does it happen? Again, it is because that it's a working memory. It is not got stored in your long-term memory. It is still there in your working or short-term memory. So that is why you, repeat things. So these are some of the things, again, which are very interesting to understand why things happen the way they are. Now, coming back to a very interesting thing which we had seen in creativity and problem solving, which is when you have a problem, there is something that you're not finding, there's some issue that you're trying to handle, tackle, continuously you're thinking about it, continuously you are working on it. but you're not able to get a solution for that, right? Why is it? And then what you do is you're like fed up, okay, I'm just going off to sleep, or I'm not thinking about this, and you start doing something else. And thak say, some sort of, an idea comes or an insight comes into that solution, or you suddenly remember, oh gosh, I kept the key here, when you're not thinking about it consciously. So that is called the incubation period. And, that also, why does it happen that we're not able to, we're working so hard towards something, to remember something, we're not doing it, and we take a break and not think about the problem, and we get the solution. So again, this is something which is very interesting to study, right? Similarly, example given is of a foggy day. Why are we not able to see the distance? How far is the tree, or how far? Why does our perception, not work? So these are some of the day-to-day challenges and day-to-day things that we think of, and that is something that is extremely worth understanding, studying, and that is something which has really attracted cognitive psychologists to understand and do research and think about why these things are happening. Right now, so the another very interesting thing is that when do we realize that our cognition is not working properly? See, that is when we are trying to remember something and we fail to remember, or we are, when cognition fails, right? When the cognition fails, that is when we realize that, oh God, there is something that is not working properly in our brain, right? So when there is a failure of a mental process in terms of remembering something, learning something, thinking about something, that is when we realize the importance of cognition in our in our body. So that is something that is, when everything is working fine, you hardly think about it, right? You think about it only if something goes wrong, and that is when you feel very frustrated, you feel embarrassed, and sometimes it can be very dangerous. You're forgetting things and all of that. So it's only when things go wrong, right? So that is why this whole cognitive psychology is studied, and that is why it's a complete mental phenomena. That is why it is said that it's a very step-by-step, systematic and scientific study of the mind, because it's not just one thing. There are so many things which are attached to it.
Hello.
Right. So moving on to the next topic, that what are the ways of studying this? What is the way of understanding cognition? What are the different things that are done by the psychologist to understand and study the cognitive psychology, right? So the first thing here is, and we have a complete subject on that, and that is research. Can I just request everybody to put their things on mute? Right. So now what is, what do the psychologists do? How do they study all these things that we've been talking about, the examples that I've been taking? How do they study it? You can't just look at a person and think what's going on in his mind. So what are the different ways? So you do a proper systematic scientific research, right? Research always has a goal. There is always something that you are trying to understand about a behavior of a person. Why? What is happening inside his brain that is making the person behave in a certain way? So that is where our research, trying to collect data, trying to analyze data, and not just gathering information and data, but also inferring, taking out some inferences from that data. That is what is important to understand why a person has a particular type of cognitive behavior, right? Now, what are the different ways in which a psychologist can do that, right? So there are different research methods using which this can be studied. The cognition of a human, human being can be studied. The first one is through experiments. So these are controlled experiments. They happen in a lab, in a controlled environment. So that is one of the ways of understanding the human cognition. So here, we'll be studying more about this in our research and other things. But here, just to give you a small, this thing, experiment, what happens is there are independent variables and there are dependent variables. Now, independent variables are the ones that you can change. Okay, for example, if there is a plant, then you can change the quantity of water that you are putting. So you can control that variable. That is an independent variable which you are controlling, moderating. You can, increase it or decrease it. Now, what is the dependent variable? It is the growth of a plant or the fruits that come out or the leaves that come out. You don't have any control over that, right? So that is a dependent. That is depending on the independent variable, which is fertilizer or water. So here, just to kind of, tell you how an experiment in a lab setup works. Similarly, there are a lot of, psychological, research that is done. For example, if you want to understand, how does the temperature in a gym, change the performance of a person who's gymming, right? So you can control the temperature. You can increase the temperature, decrease the temperature. You can, use that independent variable, but the performance is the dependent variable. So similarly, many such researches can be done in a lab setup where you can, understand, a certain behavior of people. So that is the first one under a lab setup. The second way in which you can understand cognition is psychobiological research. Now here you are actually checking the brain. You are actually testing the brain. So the first point in this is post-mortem, which is, we've heard in films right from the beginning, post-mortem ki report ke mutabik, so what exactly happens? So you're trying to study that, this brain, what was the functioning? What was the cognitive functioning of the way the brain of this dead person, what does it, so you can make out what he was thinking or how he was behaving just before he died. So that can be done. That is one of the ways to understand what was going on in his mind before he committed suicide, right? So that is something that you can do by studying the physical brain. That's why it's called psychobiological, because you're studying the biology of the brain. Okay, the second thing is also you study images, all the structures of the brain and all of that of people or somebody who has some cognitive deficit. If there is some deficit, you are again using, using imagery and all of that to understand why the cognition is working the way it is, right? And again, the third way is for any normal performance, what are the processes that, cerebral processes that are taking place. So I think we learn more about it later. I remember, one of our teachers telling us that when something is happening, some sort of process is happening, how that person is, how those whole cells and everything change, right? So that is for a normal behavior. So there are these three things: post-mortem, or for a cognitive deficit, or for even a normal process. So all these things can be biologically studied, right, to understand how human cognition takes place. The third thing is self-reports, right? Self-reports, case studies, and naturalistic observation. Now, self-report is a very interesting concept where, again, this is not like you're, understanding the brain or in a lab setup, but here you ask the person to write about themselves. It's also, when I remember doing interning with in a rehab center, all the people there are supposed to write their own autobiography. Starting from childhood, what are the incidents they remember, everything about that person. So that gives you very descriptive information about how that person or how that alcoholic's brain functioned from childhood to now. What were the various things he was thinking about and what led to, so it could just boil down to a self-esteem issue. That's where it started, right? So that's a very effective tool used in many places. So that is self-reporting. The person himself is reporting about the incidences. Then case studies, we all know what are case studies. So case studies can be done through observations, through interviews and all of that, and naturalistic observations. So they're in their own natural setup, you're observing. As a psychologist, you're sitting and making notes. Normally, when a group of children are there in the psychologist will just sit down and observe how the child is behaving. So these are the different ways in which you can understand cognition again, right? So self-reports, case studies, and naturalistic observations. Next way you can study is through computers, simulations, and artificial intelligence. Now, what is artificial intelligence? What is simulation? All these, computer games and all that, the bikes and all of that is based on how, a person's cognition would work. If I turn right, the bike has to move. So all these cognitive, the simulations are based on how a human mind would work, right? So it's programmed like that. So for that also you had to first, the person who is working on artificial intelligence or these simulations needs to understand how a human mind would work, right? So that's also another way to study the cognition. What exactly happens when this, so if then and all those things, if he does this happens, and then this happens, that kind of a thing. So that is another way to understand the human cognition. So there are these various ways in which a human so psychologists, researchers, and all of that have tried to understand how human cognition works, right? And again, also, it's not an independent thing that, okay, we are only studying, a psychologist is studying how it works. There is, there is interdisciplinary thing. You can take inputs from various other fields, various other subjects, for example, cognitive science or artificial intelligence, psychobiology, philosophy, linguistic, anthropology. So all these things also tell you about cognition. So it's not just that a psychologist does it as an independent thing. You also keep on, it's like a mutual thing that you learn from all these things as well. So as holistically, if you want to understand how cognition works, you have to also, so other disciplines are also involved in this. So this is about, what are the different ways to understand cognition. So in a lab setup, as a psychobiological research, case studies, self-reports, naturalistic observation, computer simulation, artificial intelligence. So many of these things can be used to understand the human cognition. Now coming to the domains of cognitive psychology, right? So what are the different areas that you study? If you say cognition, what exactly does it include? What are the different things inside us that's going on, which makes us store information, process information, perceive information, remember information in a certain way, right? So there are multiple things again here. First one is cognitive neuroscience, right? How the the electrochemicals and all the brain and the nervous system, how does that work? That has a huge impact again on the cognition. So yes, we need to understand, how those cells are working, how the, neurons or, all of that is working. So that is, definitely involved in, that's why they call it, psychosomatic. When you're thinking your mental health is not okay, then your body starts reacting to it. So basically they say, no, it's all in your mind. Why does, what we are thinking starts affecting our body? We start feeling that we are sick, we are ill, we are unwell. It's because of this reason. So both the, neuroscience as well as cognitive, psychologists, they all work in tandem. So it's something that, you work together with also understanding the, the neuroscience part of it, right? So that is the first one. The second thing is perception. Now, this is the second domain. When you're talking about the domain of this thing, this is the second part of, cognition. Now, what is perception? Perception is, again, something that, it's about the sensory, the senses, right? Anything that you can see, touch, feel. So two people can be sitting in the same room looking at the same things, but one person perceives it in a different way, the other one perceives it in a completely different way, right? So that is also a very interesting subject or study on, or research on, why, how people perceive things.
Guys, all of you, can you kindly mute your mic?
Kindly mute all of you. How are these, interpreted? How are the sensory signals interpreted? That is also something which is very closely, when you're talking about studying cognition, this also forms a very, very important part, right? So perception is studied in this for sure. But also along with the perception, there are many other things that are, so again, when I'm saying perception, it basically means the sensory stimuli. What is it that I am seeing in my environment, which my, my eyes, my ears, my sense of smell, taste, all that is, understanding about what I am observing and how it is storing. So perception plays a very important part. It's about sensory thing. The second thing is pattern recognition. See, looking at a series and an array of letters or alphabets actually by itself mean nothing. So when we are looking, when our brain, our cognition is looking at an array of things, how is it understanding it? Just looking at some text, some drawing, how does our mind understand what is written there, right? So that is because of pattern recognition, right? Again, here we are talking about, just lines and curves and all that mean nothing. But when you read it, you try to understand it, comprehend it, put it in your memory. So that's also the second, rather the third thing that you do when you're talking about cognition. How does the brain understand these patterns, right? That's how a child starts reading and understanding. So all that is part of cognition. His cognitive ability is developing when he starts reading, starts with alphabets, goes on to 2-letter, 3-letter words, and so on and so forth, and sentences, right? So that is the third part. The fourth thing is attention. Again, when we are talking about within the scope of cognition, these are the things which come, right? The fourth thing is attention. Now, what is it that we pay our attention on? Right? So there are so many things that are happening around us, but it's not that we pay attention to everything that is going around, right? So how are we selective? How are we selecting what, we need to pay attention on? So again, it happens at two levels. One is at a sensory level. Something, see, we keep looking at objects around us. There's a chair, there's a table. Do we really pay attention to that? But if something, suppose a chair has fallen down, you pay attention to that, right? When something goes wrong or something different happens. So that catches your attention. So it's not that you're trying to pay attention to everything. So again, your senses part is one thing. And the second thing is, at a cognitive level, how are you able to understand, or process that particular information? How is that thing catching enough attention to actually store it in your memory, or it goes, some things are worth paying attention to and storing in your memory. Some things most of the things you just avoid, right? And anything which happens in excess, right? There is too much of thinking, or too much of attention paying to a lot of things, or too much of cognitive this thing, then there is an attention overload. There is an overload in the thing, and that is when you break down, right? That's why they say just take it easy, breathe, and all those things, because you're so bogged down with so many things that catch your attention and that you have to pay attention to, that your mind starts breaking down. So that's why you have to be, doing it very cautiously. So attention again is another, one of the other things in cognitive psychology. Next one is the consciousness, right? Consciousness is what? Awareness of certain things. What is happening? So awareness, both in terms of external as well as internal, right? So this is also a concept which is very, so for example, the example which is given here is that externally, you are looking at a watch, you're looking at a clock, okay? Right now it is 7:26, okay? Now, internally, what is happening? Internally also, there is a process that is happening, right? You are thinking about, oh my God, I'm getting late. Vasudha has to take the next class. It's only 5 minutes left or 4 minutes left. That is going on. So it's not just, so very consciously, I'm not only looking at an external thing, but also some thoughts which are happening internally inside me that, oh, I need to close the class quickly, right? So that is consciousness, being aware of certain things which are happening both externally and internally, right? So this is also something which has caught the attention of cognitive psychologists, right? What exactly happens? What is this unconscious mind, conscious mind, subconscious mind, all of that. Next thing, of course, is memory. We all know memory plays a very, very important part, how much we remember. And of course, the whole education system is based on this particular, that's the only, in fact, yardstick to, unfortunately, to measure how intelligent a child is. Actually, that's just one of the parts, how the person is memorizing. Again, here we talk about short-term memory, long-term memory, and we learn a lot in detail in the later chapters. There are chapters dedicated to this. So memory, of course, is a very important part of cognition, right? And representation of knowledge. Okay, how are we representing that knowledge? How do those, so there are schemas and all of that. We learn a lot about how knowledge is represented when we do lifespan, especially when we do Piaget's theory, how exactly, how, okay, just to take a very small example, when the child, 1-year-old, is going out with his mother and he sees a four-legged creature with a tail and barking. And he says, he just looks at that and says, mama. So the mummy says, it's not mama, it's a doggy. So now this schema happens and he remembers that, okay, this is a doggy. Next, he sees a cat. The child again will look at the cat and say, doggy. So mama is going to say that, no, this is not a doggy, it's a cat, right? So now the child's schema is, whatever old information was there is getting replaced by this modified information, right? So that is the way, memory, why, how does it get represented like that? How does he know the difference now between from one creature and he calls everything a doggy to now there are 2 or 3 or 4? So all that is also very interesting, how the representation of knowledge takes place inside our cognition, right? And how it is stored. So that is also, that forms a very, and concept formation. Yeah, that's a very, very important. And we saw it in Piaget, and we'll learn more about it. How from being egocentric, that everybody, you start looking at the world from your side, your end. That's how you start as a baby. You don't know if an object, that's why you play peekaboo. The moment somebody is hidden, the child starts crying, thinking that object doesn't, the mother doesn't exist, right? But later on, as he grows older, a little bit older, he realizes, no, that is, she's just hiding somewhere. So how does that concept start getting formed? So that is all part of representation of knowledge, right? This is also a very important part of cognition. Then imagery, right? What are the mental images we are forming in our mind when we are talking about buildings, street lights, spotlights, all those things? There are certain images that are getting created. So that imagery is also a very integral part of the cognition, right? Next is language. Very, very important. We have, I think, a whole unit dedicated to language, right? The importance of language. Language is not just for communication. It is to understand the concept. It is to, express yourself. It is so much more, and everything, our whole cognition, in fact, the behavior depends so much on language. Imagine, just to take an example of a child who's coming from another city, doesn't know Kannada, and he goes into a Kannada medium school. He's trying to grasp things, but he's not able to express. See, his cognitive ability goes down, right? So that is how, that is how much language is important. And we will do a detailed study, right? We have a whole unit to do that. But yes, please do remember, language plays a very important part. And developmental psychology, again, plays a very, very huge part in this, which means lifespan psychology, right? From the child, how he's growing, his nurture, nature, how he's learning from environment, and all of that. That is such an important part. And we see, like, I always say that when you do a counseling for an elder, an adult, you will notice that the behavior patterns, the way he's thinking, his cognition, everything starts from the childhood. So it's very important to understand how the development process has taken place for this individual, right? Thinking and concept formation. Yeah, concept formation, I already told you a little bit earlier. Thinking, extremely important, right? Of course, end of the day, those are the thoughts which lead to emotions, which lead to the action. So how you're thinking, that's the way you start feeling, and how you feel, you start reacting or acting upon. So that's why thoughts play such an important part. And that's why people say have positive thoughts, because the moment you look at things differently, more objectively, more positively, your emotions also change from frustration, irritation, anger to warmth and love and whatever. And then accordingly, your action changes. So it's very important. Again, thinking is a part of cognition, which really plays a very, very important part. And of course, human and artificial intelligence. So this again is, we saw that how, artificial intelligence is what, again, it's the whole thing is, how the human mind works. They have put it on machines. So everything, artificial intelligence is not just some concrete information like our, computers earlier would work, but also abstract information. And now with artificial intelligence, even things like emotions and all those things are coming into play. So again, talking about why this is here is because, again, through artificial intelligence, we are trying to understand exactly how the cognition takes place in a human being. So these are all the different things that come under the domain of cognition. So just to revise, it is cognition, the domain means the whole area of study. What do you study when you're talking about cognition? You study neuroscience, you study perception, pattern recognition, attention, consciousness, memory, how you represent the knowledge, imagery, language, developmental psychology, which is lifespan, thinking, concept formation, how as you grow, you form, how your thoughts are important, and human and artificial intelligence. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the wonderful explanation, Seema. Somebody asked the difference between attention and consciousness, right? So in order to explain that, I will have to give you this explanation. Attention is the concentration of awareness on some phenomenon to the exclusion of others. That means when you receive a stimuli, you're concentrating on the stimuli that you've received. Now, attention is towards the stimuli that you get from the environment. And consciousness refers to the individual awareness of unique thoughts, memories, feelings, sensations, and the environment around you. That means consciousness is your effort to put your concentration on the thoughts that you have, the memories that you have, and the rest. I hope this explains the person's doubt towards concentration and attention. Sorry, consciousness and attention. Can someone please answer?
Right, Vasudha. I think you can move on to the rest of the chapter, and maybe towards the end, if we have time, and we can keep, see, this is just the first unit and first chapter. I think as we go, we will start connecting all the dots. So yeah, please carry on.
So this was just to help in understanding, because the minute they ask a doubt, it is always easier to understand immediately. Anyways, going forward. Okay, no problem. For all the wonderful explanation that Seema has given, it is my turn to explain the history of cognitive psychology. Now, during the starting stages of cognitive psychology, or the thought process as to where did knowledge come from, began way early. So this was during the period of Plato and Aristotle and all those people, and probably even before that. So when this happened, there were two types of people, or two segments of people, called the empirists and the nativists. So the empiricists had actually stated that the knowledge had come from experience. That means if you actually experience something, you take the experience and the knowledge forms based on that. And nativists said that it was an innate characteristics, which meant that it came from within us. However, they could not prove which one of this was correct or wrong. And these were the fundamental guides towards cognitive psychology. Now, the fascination of knowledge was continuous. It had been moving through from the past till the present. Even now, people are very fascinated about where the knowledge had come from. Now, Aristotle's idea was that knowledge was localized in the heart. That means all the knowledge that came was from your heart. Whereas Plato, on the other hand, said that all this knowledge had depended on the brain. That means it came from the brain. And later on, during the period of Renaissance, philosophers and theologists were very happy to say that the knowledge was located in the brain. So they backed up Plato by saying all the knowledge was from the brain. They also said that there were two types of input for all this knowledge that they gain. That is the mundus sensibilis, which meant about physical sense, that is touch, taste, and all the other senses that we have. And the second type of knowledge, or the source of knowledge, was mundus intellectualis, which means a divine source, that is from God. Let me stop sharing just a minute. I am so sorry for the delay. And so on. After this, in the 18th century, philosophers and psychologists had gone to such an extent saying that psychology was a scientific process. Now, scientific psychology, that is, it was the beginning of cognitive psychology and psychology as a scientific process. Now, British empiricists such as George Berkeley, David Hume, Carter James Mill, along with his son John Stuart Mill, had actually suggested that the internal representation is of three types. That is, whatever we are thinking is of three types: the direct sensory events, faint copies of perception or percept, which have been stored in our brain. That means it is a copy of the events that have happened previously, and we are recollecting them from the memory. And the third one was the transformation of these faint copies, that is associated thought. Now, we all know the STM and the LTM, right? So all these memories that are stored in the LTM are transferred from our long-term memory to our short-term memory in order for them to be recalled. Now, during the 19th century, with the help of psychologists like Gustav Fechner, Hermann Helmholtz, Maximilian Wundt. Now, this person, Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt, is the father of current day psychology, or the experimental psychology. Now, and Oxford Kelp. These people had actually formed the discipline of psychology into its own branch and divided it from philosophy. Otherwise, we would be actually doing philosophy now instead of psychology. Now, the view of knowledge had taken a radical turn with the arrival of the 12th century, that is 1100 and all that, due to these concepts such as behaviorism and gestaltism. Gestalt psychologists had explained the concept of representation with the context of isomorphism. And behaviorists had actually believed that the human and animal psychology was within the framework of stimulus and response. Now, stimulus and response is our response to the stimulus that we've received from outside. There was an example given in our textbook regarding the maze in which a rat was put in, and from where the rat would actually find its path out, and it usually uses a picture of the environment it is in order to find its way out. Now, this picture that we have of our environment is called a cognitive map. Now, it is the same thing that can be applied to even us. If suppose you're traveling in a car and someone else is driving, please, when someone else is driving only, if you close your eyes and try to recollect the place that you're in with our eyes closed, you'll actually know which speed breaker is where. You can close your eyes and tell a person who's driving that there's going to be a speed breaker here, even if your eyes are closed, because there's a mental picture of the area that you're in at that particular time. Please tell me I'm right, because this is how I feel. I really hope a response right now. Someone, anyone?
Yes, you are right, Vasudha.
Thank you. So to go ahead, now this was during the 12th century. Now current day psychology, okay, before we go ahead, I said, I spelled out a word called isomorphism. Now isomorphism is a structural correspondence between the perceptual experience and the neural activity in our brain. So it is a correspondence between what we think and what is actually happening. And in the year 1932, Frederick Bartlett had rejected the popular idea of memory and forgetting, which can be studied from nonsense syllables, which meant that people who had experimented on the concept of memory using nonsense syllables were actually rejected by this person. He stated that more clear or more meaningful meaningful words or meaningful acts or meaningful events can be remembered better than nonsense syllables and such. In the year 1950, that is the current day, whatever we are having right now is from here. So in the year 1950, the interest in, just a minute. So in the year 1950, the interest towards semantic organization, pattern recognition, all this had increased. Sorry. I am so sorry for the delay. Yes. In the year 1950, the interest towards attention, memory, pattern recognition, images, semantic organization, language processing, thinking, consciousness, all these had become more and more. And instead of making, in spite of all these concepts, one was, I am so sorry. Yeah, all these concepts were actually considered outside the boundary of experimental psychology, which meant that all these were not considered as a part of experimental psychology till this point. Now, the factors that were accounting to pro-cognitive revolution. Now, the whole purpose of this chapter is to know the cognitive revolution, which had been separated from the philosophy and all that. So the reasons why all this, the entire process of cognitive psychology came out only due to these 5 factors. That is the failure of behaviorism, which meant that behaviorism studied overt responses to stimuli and had failed to account the vastness of the human behavior in the case of language. Now we have an entire block which is associated with language and language processing, language acquisition, and all that. Behaviorists actually studied only the responses that were given to stimuli, and it did not consider the language aspect of cognition. Now, since language is a part of cognition, it has an entire system of its own, which meant that there were more processes that had to be studied, and behaviorism could not help with explaining all those. Now, emergence of communication theory. This prompted the experiments in signal detection, attention, cybernetics, information theory, and which are significant to cognitive psychology. Now, again, this is also related to the language processing and language acquisition part of our subject, which meant that signal detection, all these cryptography and speaking, the communication between two people, the sign language, everything comes under this particular topic, because all these are a part of our cognitive processes. Modern linguistics, again, it mentions the language and the grammatical structures, which were very important towards the attitude of cognition. Because without language and without grammatical structures or language acquisition, language processing, there was no way of understanding the different aspects of cognition. And next comes to memory research. Linguistics provided empirical base for theories of memory. Now, research into the depths of memory had come out with saying that linguistics was one particular such topic that gave us a basic idea or an in-depth idea of memory. I'm so sorry with the stammering. Computers and other technological advances. Now, development of artificial intelligence had helped us in trying to open up our world into the process of memory, problem solving, storage, language acquisition, and acquisition. And the next and the final one amongst these particular pro-cognitive revolutions were the development of cognitive psychology. Now, Jean Piaget's theory was one of the major examples that can be given under cognitive development, because it talks about how people move from one stage in life to another. And moving on to the next, the key issues in the study of cognitive psychology. In the cognitive psychology, there are certain aspects that we refer to. That is the nature versus nurture, the rationalism versus empiricism, structure versus process. Let's just check the details of all of these in particular. Just a second. So this was one of our questions in the assignment that we had, right? So if you remember writing this from the textbook, you wouldn't get much information because it was all in the format of questions. In order to explain it, I did do this for my assignment. So I think it will help in a better way of understanding. So nature versus nurture. It was believed that the innate characteristics of a human cognition is important. That means the inherent characteristics of a person were very important in cognition. And then research that is focused on this. Sorry, I'm really sorry about this.
Vastuda, I don't think it's
I'm so sorry.
bothering a lot. We can ignore it and continue. It's not bothering us.
It is bothering me. I'm sorry about this. So, nature versus nurture. As we know, nature and nurture debate was a very big debate all throughout the history of psychology. It is still going on now as to people trying to find out whether nature is better than nurture. And here also it is the same thing. So the research that focuses on the innate characteristics is studying that itself. And the people who believe that environment played an important role in cognition also focused on research in the same method. Now, rationalism versus empiricism, the practice or principle of basing opinions or action on reason and knowledge rather than the religious beliefs or emotional responses is called as rationalism. It is the belief in the innate ideas, reasons, and deduction. These are the more logical people. That is why they're the more rational people as well. Empiricism is the theory that all knowledge is based on experience derived from our senses. It is the belief in the senses, perception, induction, and that there are no innate ideas. That means it says that there is nothing that comes from within us. It is all what we receive from the outside as stimuli and experiences. Next, we move on to structure versus process. Structures are the basic mental processes that people use to make sense of an information. Now, you're organizing something in your head or organizing an information that you receive from outside in your head. Now, this is structure. That means you're organizing the information in order to make sense of it. Now, cognitive processes refer to the gaining of knowledge and comprehension. They include thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, and problem solving. Just a minute. Yeah. Which means that the cognitive processes are all about getting more knowledge and understanding it. So thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, and problem solving are all a part of cognitive processes. Now, generality and domain specificity. This is one major topic that creativity lies in. Now, domains are the different parts of cognition, or it refers to different areas of cognition. Now, domain generality or domain general learning are the theories of development that suggest that humans are born with mechanisms inside our brain in order to support and guide learning on a broader level, regardless of the type of information that we have received. That means that whatever information we have received is broken down and is done within the brain. And this mechanism is in the brain, which helps in our day-to-day lives in all the works that we do. Domain specificity is the concept in cognitive science that suggests that some cognitive functions are solely responsible for individual specific functions and not multiple ones. Now, if this actually represents the G factor and S factor that we've studied about, the domain generality is the G factor, which is common throughout our entire day or entire mental process of thinking. Now, domain specificity refers to the S factor or the specific factor, which is which is there only for certain specific tasks that we do. Now, validity of certain, sorry, causal inferences versus ecological validity. Causal inferences is a process of drawing a conclusion about a casual connection based on the conditions of the occurrence of an effect. And the ecological validity is the measure of how tests test performances predict behavior in a real world setting. Applied versus basic research. Applied research is the specific study within the field of psychology that focuses on solving problems, curing illnesses, innovating technologies, and its main purpose is to conduct scientific researches and applying it to real world situations. That is basically when Corona came out, they tried to research on Corona in order to find a vaccine for it. Now, that is an applied research or basic fundamental research is a scientific process with the aim of improving scientific theories for better understanding and predicting of natural and other phenomena. Now, this research is you're taking a natural process and trying to find out as to why it happened in order for us to understand it better. And the last of this is biological versus behavioral methods. Just a minute. Yes, biological perception is a way of looking at psychological issues by studying the physical basics for animals and human behavior. It involves a study of brain, immune system, nervous system, and genetics. Basically, what we do when we are talking about the brain structures and what we're studying about the brain structures, the hormones, and all that. This is a part of lifespan psychology where we're talking about how the person is developing in all aspects of physical and biological methods. Behavioral methods are methods used to study the neural, I don't even know what I've written there. Sorry, usual molecular, genetic, or psychological mechanisms that underlie behavior in a human or other animals or methods used to study psychology of a behavior. I'm so sorry about that because I do not know the word that I've written there. The genetic or the psychological mechanisms refer to the hormonal changes that we have in our body. This again is based on what they've studied in humans and animals. This is common to both humans and animals. Now let's go back to the textbook. And now we move on to the key ideas of cognitive psychology. Now there are 5 such ideas where these keep repeating no matter how many times you look into the entire process. Now, cognitive psychology data is also understood in a context of an explanatory theory, which is empty without hardcore evidence. Now, whatever information you get from outside, the stimuli that you get from outside, the data that you get from outside is understood with explanation of a particular theory. Everything follows a particular theory, but you cannot follow a theory blindly unless it has empirical or hardcore evidence. Cognition is generally adaptive, except in a few specific instances. Cognitive processes interact among themselves as well as with other non-cognitive processes. This means in our cognitive process, thinking, remembering, problem solving, the creativity, all of these are interacting with each other in order to complete the certain tasks that we have at hand. Cognition has various scientific approaches. In order to explain or understand cognition, you can use different scientific approaches to understand it. All basic research may lead to application, and all applied research may lead to basic understanding. So I hope you understood this, because it is very simple. Whatever basic research you have in order to understand a certain aspect, this can be used in different applications. And whatever applied research you have, it can be used in order to have a basic understanding of a certain aspect. Apart from these, there are certain others that you have in here. That is computer metaphors and human cognition. Now, what do computers do best? They're very good at high-speed mathematical functions, and they always abide by the rules that were written in order for the computer to follow. And humans generally or relatively are not so good at it. But what do humans do best? From form generalizations, that means make opinions, have inferences, that is again opinionation, understanding complex patterns, such as if you look at a painting, beautiful painting of an artist, the strokes, the designs drawn, the painting done, it cannot be understood by a computer as well as a human can do. And having emotions is one of the biggest factors. Not every, or basically no machine, no robot has ever had emotions. And please do not quote Robo 1 and Robo 2 of Rajnikant's movies. Cognitive sciences. Now, cognitive sciences. Oh, before we go ahead, I forgot to tell you, people have developed computers which are slower at mathematical processes and have more brain-like structures of brain-like feel. That means they can understand complex patterns now, as in the present day times. But emotions are still difficult to manifest in a computer. Now, cognitive sciences is a combination of computer science, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. The science of human cognition is undergoing a radical transformation as a result of major changes in both computer and brain sciences, which means understanding of human cognition is taking a turn as soon as either the computer sciences or the brain sciences, that is neurosciences, are taking change or changing constantly. Now, neuroscience or cognitive psychology, all the information of the brain functions were received as a result of brain or head injuries. See, all the knowledge that we have about our brain, as in the temporal lobe, the frontal lobe, the activities done by each of these different parts of our brain, were all due to the different head injuries that were caused. So thanks to the previous people who had head injuries, we now understand which particular part of our brain is used for thinking, planning. And if you look at this, the best example for this is your past theory. Now, past theory, the planning part of it the planning part of whatever you're doing takes place in your frontal lobe. Now, arousal and attention take place in your brainstem. The successive process takes place in your parietal and occipital. I'm sorry if I'm messing that up. I will look back and let you know. So all this is a part of your thinking and your neuroscience. To understand all this, someone had to go through a brain injury in order for us to understand what we had to study now. Now, let's thank all the people who had brain injuries for letting us study all this. And that is the end of your chapter.
End of unit 1?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I hope you people
Thank you,
understood.
Vasudha.
Yes, it is recording.
So, can we stop recording? I'm saying.
Yes, please. Yes, please. And guys, just a small story before we all leave. Now,